Hi, I'm Tom Doyle, Associate Professor of Justice and Interim Director of the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society here at Community College of Philadelphia. Welcome to our Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. In this episode, Adjunct Professor David Travaskis interviews Giovanni Campbell. Mr. Campbell is a champion of criminal justice and one of the bright criminal defense lawyers in the city, whose diverse background provides a unique prism through which to view the justice system. Please enjoy what I'm sure you will find to be a very interesting and informative conversation.
Welcome to the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Travaskis, an adjunct professor in the Paralegal Studies program. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Giovanni Campbell. Giovanni is a lawyer, a private practice attorney here in Philadelphia, who is a renowned member of the Hispanic bar here in Philadelphia and a great champion of the topic that we're going to be talking about today, access to justice. So Giovanni, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you for having me, David. It's always good to see you.
Why don't we start out by you just telling everyone a little bit about what you do today?
Well, I'm a solo practitioner, which means that my firm is a small one, managed and run by myself. I have a couple of part-time employees, and I do an awful lot of criminal defense and trial work. Criminal defense trial and appellate work, mostly in federal court nowadays, but also in state court. And a few years ago, it was the reverse. I've been a solo practitioner for most of my career since 1995, and because I've always valued that the community should have access to the legal process, I've placed my practice in neighborhood locations for most of my career.
And that's interesting. I want to ask you a little bit about your background. Obviously, you don't sound like you grew up in Philadelphia.
No.
How did you come to be here in Philadelphia?
Well, I was born and raised in Panama, and I moved to the United States when I was 12 years old. I went to high school and college in New York, but I chose Temple as my law school. It was my first choice. And when I came out to Temple, I decided to stay in Philadelphia.
Now, had you ever been to Philadelphia before you came to law school here?
Oh yeah, before that I had a couple of friends who went to Temple undergrad, people that I'd gone to high school and college with, and I would come out to visit. And also we were all big fans of Penn relays since we all ran track, and so we used to come out at least once a year just for that.
I want to go back now to what you were talking about having offices in the community and doing that kind of community work. A lot of the neighborhoods where you have had offices are not places where people are generally well-to-do.
That's right.
And can somebody make a living working with people who are living on the edge?
Well, yes, but it's often a challenge, and I suppose maybe that's why there aren't that many people doing it. But I think that it's very important for lawyers to do pro bono work, and it's something that I've always taken very seriously, and that is the perfect place to find pro bono work.
It really walks into your office every day.
It walks into your office, literally, yeah.
Okay. Now, you are primarily a criminal defense attorney.
That's right.
And the criminal justice system, we hear lots and lots of things about how it functions and the problems in how it functions. Can a defendant, especially the kinds of defendants that you often get, who are young, who are minority, who are not well educated and not well financed, can they get justice in this system?
Well, they can get representation in the system, and then I guess justice is a different question depending on the particular facts of the case. Everyone has a right to an attorney, and indigent clients or clients who cannot afford an attorney will get one at no expense to him or her, and to that extent, it certainly works. There's no one in criminal court or any adversary part of the proceeding without counsel. It's something that we do very well here in Philadelphia, and I hope around the country.
Well, we're talking about that, and this is focused on criminal law, because
Right.
we know there is no corresponding right, the Gideon right, which takes its name from the Gideon trial of many years ago that went to the Supreme Court, I think in 1963. That Gideon right for criminal defendants means that, and then we all hear the TV shows.
Sure.
You can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you.
Right.
But you're saying that works in Philadelphia, because I hear people on the street say, well, if you get a public defender, you're not going to do well. Is that true?
Well, I mean, it's like anything else. You don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know what you're going to get. But I think that the defender community in Philadelphia is outstanding. In my opinion, the best in the country by far, in every way. They have great training. They have a very, very strong philosophy and very strong belief in zealous representation, and they have great teamwork. I think they do an excellent job both locally and in the federal level.
All right, and we're going to get back to both the state and the federal system in a moment, but let's look just at the Philadelphia Public Defender's Office that Ellen Greenlee heads. You're saying that that really is a great group of lawyers, and if you end up getting a lawyer from that office, you're in pretty good shape.
I would say so, absolutely.
But not everybody gets a lawyer from that office.
Right.
Well, why is that?
Well, whenever there's basically three types of counsel in the context of criminal defense. You have either the public defender or retained counsel, someone's able to hire.
That would be people coming to you and paying you to take their case, right?
Exactly. And then there's court-appointed counsel, someone who cannot afford counsel but has one provided to him or her by the court, but it can't be the public defender because there's an actual or potential conflict.
Oh, okay. So if you and I were both arrested for committing the same crime, and part of my defense is you did it and part of your defense is I did it, one of us gets the public defender and the other person gets a lawyer off another list who the city pays for.
That's right.
But it's not one of these well-trained, bright, young people who are public defenders.
Oh, well, no, well, they could be because many people on those panels are private attorneys who are very good at what they do, and they just happen to get on the panel. You know, and some, of course, may not be, like any place else. Right. You'll find that among retained counsel as well, I think.
We always say that you have a right to counsel in criminal matters. You don't have the right to have a good counsel. That's really,
right.
You have to do your effort and you have to look at things. Well, let's go back now to this, what you were talking about, both there being the state system and there's federal system. I know you do a lot of your work today in the federal courts. What's the difference between the state system and the federal system in your eyes as a practicing attorney?
I find that they're diametrically different. They're both forms where the criminal process takes place, obviously, and the constitutional rights are the same, right? But interpretations may vary because there's different case law governing them. There's a different procedure. There are different local rules. And probably the part that most people are familiar with is the difference in penalties. You know, the exposure tends to be much, much greater in federal court.
What do you mean the exposure is greater in federal court?
By exposure, I mean the extent to which someone may be punished for the culpable conduct if convicted. And there's also greater use, or I would say more frequent use of mandatory minimums, and also the sentencing guidelines, which we can also talk about, also expose individuals to much greater sentences.
Now, this may seem too simplistic, but I've been told by people that the way you look at it is that in the state system, you can have anything from jaywalking to double murder cases, but in the federal system, what you're really going to have is big cases, and a lot of big cases, and actually a lot of big drug cases right now seem to be the focus.
I mean, for the most part, they vary too with time, but they definitely wouldn't be small cases. Although I know that federal misdemeanor charges exist, I've never seen one. And as far as the magnitude of the culpable conduct, it tends to be greater over there. For example, if you encounter a drug case and it involves, let's say, 15 kilos or more, it's a lot more likely that you'll see that in federal court than you would in state court. But it can be prosecuted in either forum.
But somebody who just has a small amount of drugs is probably going to be in a state court. Somebody with huge amounts of drugs is going to be in the federal system.
For the most part. Yeah.
Can you walk us through what it looks like when you have a case in the state system and then compare that to what it looks like when you have a case in the federal system?
Well, from the perspective of a practitioner, probably the biggest difference is that there seems to be a more predictable timeline in the federal system than in the state system. In the state system, we have more court listings where we show up and we don't know what's going to happen that day, if the case is going to be postponed to another date or if we're actually going to do that day what we came to do. In federal court, when something is listed, you know that it's going to happen because it's the only thing that's listed that day, probably that day at all, and certainly at that time on that day. When you walk into the Criminal Justice Center, your case will be one of 40-something or likely many more cases on the list, and you sit there through the call of the list just to determine which cases are ready, and then cases begin to be called again, and you just have to wait around.
Now, the transition that you've made in your career, starting with state cases, getting a lot of experience in that more free-for-all kind of system, and then moving on to the federal system, is that a very common experience for lawyers doing your kind of work?
It is for many. It is for many. I'm going to guess that, well, most of my colleagues who've made that transition actually like it, and I like it very much. It just makes for a much cleaner and streamlined practice. And I also think that it helps us to focus more on particular cases, because usually the evidence is so much more for the cases in federal court that you get to spend more time actually dealing with the nuts and bolts of the investigation.
We were talking about the volume of cases. Does the amount of cases that are heard in the state system versus the smaller number of cases that are heard in the federal system, does that impact on the kinds of justice that can be given in those systems?
Well, certainly in the federal system, a lot more time is devoted to each and every case. It's not like a pebble in the sand in federal court. You can be sure that the court and all counsel are going to be attentive to what's going on there.
There's a big difference in terms of who you appear before in both state court and federal court. Do you want to speak to some of those differences?
In both systems, judges have a tremendous amount of discretion, so that they, there's a whole range of decisions that they can make in a certain situation and still be within the rules of evidence or, whatever governs that particular situation. I think that in both camps, judges exercise their discretion to the fullest extent. In federal court, I would say that there are areas where that discretion is used more, and other areas where it's used less. But I think it really depends on the judge. Now, when we talk about mandatory minimums, then the discretion is lacking for the judge, whether it be in state court or in federal court. In federal court, mandatory minimums is something that's used much more frequently, and in that sense, the judges in federal court are less able to use their discretion where the mandatory minimum applies.
And the mandatory minimums are legislatively enacted guidelines for what the judge must sentence a person to?
Yeah, it's when a statute decrees that a person convicted of that particular offense cannot receive a sentence lower than whatever the statute prescribes, no matter what.
Okay, and the judges have no wiggle room on that?
No wiggle room, with the exception that there are two exceptions. The most common exception is if there is a cooperating defendant. And if that person cooperates to the satisfaction of the government, then the government, meaning the federal prosecutor, files a motion for downward departure and downward variance. Once that motion is filed and it's approved by the judge, which invariably it is, then the judge, and only then, the judge has the authority to sentence that defendant below the mandatory minimum. So it kind of puts the discretion in the hands of the prosecution as opposed to the judge. Once that motion is filed and approved, then the judge has the discretion to sentence the individual as he or she sees fit.
All right. Now, in our state system, we elect our judges. In our federal system, they're nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Does that make a big difference in who actually ends up being a judge?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when we deal with just appointments, then we're going to have judges that are appointed by, whoever made those decisions in the governing body. When they are elected, the people are making a choice, and each of the two processes has its pros and cons, as I see. When judges are elected, I think that there's a chance that there may be more diversity on the bench because the people actually take part in this election.
One of the big arguments for it is this idea of diversity. Right. And do we have a diverse bench in Philadelphia because of elections?
I think we do. We could use some more diversity, certainly. Philadelphia is a city of the first class with a rapidly growing foreign population. It's always been diverse, but now I think that there's such a rapid growth of that the bench really should reflect in many ways, not just that way, in many ways, the diversity that's in the communities that judges are making such important decisions about.
Okay. Now, the federal bench, you said, is a little less diverse. One of the transitions that we're seeing now, and there's been a push to basically double the number of Hispanic judges, particularly on the federal bench.
Right.
as a person, a member of the Hispanic community, you must be pleased to see that development.
Well, sure, absolutely.
Do you want to speak at all to the need for diversity on the federal bench?
Just like state judges are making decisions every day about things occurring in the Philadelphia community, so too are the federal judges, although here in the Eastern District, they hear cases that arise in one of a number of counties that are in the Eastern District. But still, it's important that a judge can at least understand the perspective of people who are testifying about areas or topics, that the judge is going to make a decision on. In other words, topics and subjects should not be foreign to the person who's making decisions over them.
All right. I want to go back to some of your personal history and talk about how that gives you a vision that may be different than other people's about the justice system. You're an immigrant to our country.
Yeah.
You want to talk about coming here and your experience about becoming a naturalized citizen and what that means to you?
I came here when I was 12 years old. My parents divorced, I guess, a couple of years before that, and we arrived we moved in with my grandmother in Washington Heights. I think it was 1979. We're a little older, aren't we? And I've lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, Flatbush, Brooklyn, and I became a naturalized citizen in, I believe, 1995 or 1996. I applied for citizenship, and I'm glad that I actually ended up having to do that. And what I mean by that, David, is that my mother did it, but just before she became naturalized, I became 18 years old, which made me have to do it instead of simply being part of her application. And so that brought me a lot closer to the process. It linked me with it instead of simply something that I could inherit with my mom. And I'm glad that I did.
Do you think your perspective as an immigrant, as a naturalized citizen, gives you a different view of the justice system than somebody like me who was born here and grew up sort of just accepting this as a birthright?
Oh, well, I certainly recognize that what is obvious to a lot of people is not necessarily obvious to others. I recognize that there's a large sector of our society that's disenfranchised and uninformed, and it's difficult for them to be informed, be it because of the language or the area of the city that they live in, or because of the particular situations that they live in. And really, it's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that I located my practice in neighborhood locations, because I wanted to make the process more accessible to these people who you most often find in neighborhood areas.
Okay. And obviously, because you are a lawyer, you've been educated in the system, you have access to the system, you interact with lawyers and judges,
right.
Political leaders, you're very comfortable in this world. How does it feel when you go back into those neighborhoods with young people and not so young people who have very different situations in life? Are you able to help translate for them the difference between what they're experiencing and what the system is that you've experienced?
Yes and no. I mean, there is a generation gap, which is a new experience to me.
We are getting older.
We are getting older. But on the other hand, no, because I spent enough time out there, and irrespective of the differences, I think that generally, when you address people as people, they can sense that you respect them as people. It's a very palpable thing, and then they engage with you. And whatever you say is considered more, and they'll ask more questions, And I think that's very, very helpful, because when people know more about the law, they feel more like they're a part of what's going on. It not only promotes lawful behavior, but it lends a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there is a belief in the system in those communities where you've worked? Is there a belief that the system can work for everyone? You grew up in Swarthmore like I did, and everybody thinks this is the greatest nation in the world. It's the rule of law holds, and everyone can get anywhere just by dint of hard work.
Right.
Is that the same belief in these neighborhoods?
For the most part, I would say no.
And what's the belief there? What do you encounter?
Well, the belief there is that justice is for some and not for others, unless the others happen to get lucky. And that's in part due to inequities that everyone can see, disenfranchised or not. And it is also partly because a lot of people just have such poor access to the system that they don't understand it enough to avail themselves of it. Which is why it's nice to have a neighborhood location that they can just walk to. One of the things that surprised me when I first came to Philadelphia was seeing how distinct neighborhoods are. It's a very very parochial city, a city of neighborhoods, which is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, when you have disenfranchised communities that have rarely left their particular area and who maybe have been downtown twice or something like that, it's kind of troubling, because those services are not available out there, and they have to be able to get around. And all it does is that it adds to the barriers that are already present. People who may not be English proficient not only are dealing with that handicap, but then the compounding handicap that they don't even know how to get around. They don't know how to drive downtown because they've never driven downtown, right? They may be intimidated by the price of parking and all the signs and the traffic and everything else. And all that does is further lock them into where they are, which is a place of very little information and consequently very little access.
Now, you had said that some people feel that justice is just for the lucky. Some of those lucky people are the people who walk into your office and you decide to represent.
Yes.
A lawyer who has a practice where you've deliberately put that practice is going to face challenges, because there will be people who have great needs and no resources.
Right.
What do you do as an individual lawyer when that person comes into your office? How do you handle that?
Well, that's a challenge. You handle that by compromising your interest in generating fees and helping someone out, and it's a judgment call that you have to make every time you find yourself in that situation. I can say that I'm proud of the decisions that I've made over the years. I've been able to help out a lot of people, and it's not very difficult to me as an immigrant, for example, to imagine myself or other people that I've known in similar situations, and how much they would gain by a lawyer who was actually willing to lend that representation at a reduced cost or even pro bono. So that's the kind of thing that helps.
Great. And that's a huge gift to the community that you make. Looking back at the bigger system, what can we do other than having more Giovanni Campbells in the neighborhoods to actually change the attitude of the people in the neighborhood and make the promise of justice that's really so important in America more reachable for everyone?
I think that maybe we can have more people and programs in neighborhoods teaching about the law, not necessarily things that are in the textbook, but simply telling them things that are available. For example, community legal services. I know that they're understaffed or short in some ways, and they always have been, but you'd be surprised, David, how many people in those neighborhoods don't even know what services are out there available for them. Now, the fact that there are pamphlets or other sources of information at different offices doesn't really help that much when we're talking about a group that's disempowered. But if we had programs or people who would hold functions like you and I used to do in the old days with Temple Leap, I think that would be very, very helpful.
Well, and you were referencing some public education about the law. I know you get involved. You do things like mock trials. You do things here at Community College of Philadelphia. You're a frequent volunteer for the high school law day that the Community College puts on to show young people about the opportunities that are here at Community College. Is just public education the only kind of answer that we can have? I always think it's like teaching people how to do surgery on themselves. Mm-hmm. They may now know how the body functions, but we really don't want them trying to take out their own appendix.
Right.
What can we do in the system itself? What are your other ideas for the system itself?
Well, another idea I think would be to help establish fellowships or mentorships. And in this way, the person has continuing guidance as opposed to just one or two information sessions. And in this way, they get to see some of what they've learned, some of what's been made available to them actually be implemented, and then they can proceed much easier from there. I think maybe if we not only from the bar but other areas of practice were to do that, it would help out the community a whole lot. Right.
Now, one of the projects that you've been involved here at community college is our high school all day and working with kids. I know that the future and young people coming up is something that matters to you. Do you see a lot of lawyers and a lot of judges getting involved with young people? And what are the best ways that they can be involved with young people?
Oh, many are. I've seen judges who serve as mentors for young people. I've also seen judges participate in mock trial competitions that you and I have been at, and I've also seen judges speak at schools, and those are all very good things to do. But I think David, the sky is the limit. Everything that you can do as a person who's not a judge, you can do as a judge, so long as it's not political involvement. And I think that for the community, just seeing a person involved who is not in the same position that they are engenders all kinds of hope. It actually is proof. It's proof that they can have access and that they can achieve these things. Particularly if it's a judge that they find some similarities with, either in background or ethnicity or residential community or anything like that.
Now, when you do the kind of work you do, especially now that you're doing it at the federal level, a lot of your clients end up being convicted of crimes.
Sure.
A lot of the people you work with have pretty sad stories coming in. How do you keep going when you have a practice like that every day puts you up against people who come from some of the worst conditions and people who've done some bad things to hurt other people? People always say to me, how can people be criminal defense lawyers? You know, they're working with all those horrible people. Don't they feel terrible about it? How do you justify what you do, and what keeps you going and keeps your energy up?
Well, it's very easy. I don't have a problem with that at all. I've always, like I said, I was taught a strong sense of fairness, and everyone is entitled to a defense, and that's something that's resonated with me from the first time that I heard it. It should not be, someone shouldn't have to convince a lawyer that he or she is innocent in order to have representation. You know, someone should have representation no matter what. It's always the government's or the Commonwealth's obligation to prove the offense is charged beyond a reasonable doubt. And there are always people out there who are who commit misdeeds, or there are really good people out there who make really bad decisions. But no matter how you look at it, these are people. You know, we're all part of this society. Something's happened, and it's landed this person in the criminal process. But I really think that we are all involved, because no matter what happens when this person comes out, you know, we have to deal with that person, which is why it's very important for me to always emphasize the rehabilitative principle in sentencing. Because when someone re-enters society, we're all in the same place again. And it's simply not enough to say that, you know, this person is bad and this person shouldn't have done this or the other thing. We inevitably share the responsibility, whether it be as victims or taxpayers or what have you. So it doesn't, on many levels, I'm very much at peace with representing the people that I do. Number one, because they're accused and not guilty of anything until proven guilty. I really strongly believe in that principle. And number two, because we are all part of the same society. Even the most wretched individual or any individual who's made the most wretched decision deserves representation.
I think that's a great way to end our segment today. Giovanni, I thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have here for today. I want to thank my guest, Giovanni Campbell, for joining us, and I want to thank you at home for tuning in. You have been watching the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Travaskis, adjunct professor in the Paralegal Studies program. For more information, please contact us here at the college, and we'll see you next time on Perspectives.